Hello, and welcome to another Rainmaker's Story World Adventures. I am Rainmaker. So I am going to read my Tomli story. That's what I'm going to do. Yesterday and the day before, I went over the whole story. I'm over 2,000 words. I'm not sure if I'm going to read all of it at one time or not. I'll just kind of see how I feel when I get going. But I'm happy with my edits. I have gone through and I have everything adjusted to reflect my new developments. Okay, and if you are new here, I have 4 science fiction and fantasy story worlds that I began creating. The first one was Emron, and that's the setting of this story. When I was 12, actually. Wasn't until middle school, teenager, high school that I started developing more of them. I never really wrote actual stories, although for Tyr, the one that has cats, I did come up with some mythologies, and I did write a little bit of mythology then. And for Shalostvar, I did create, was starting to create a language. So, don't have any of that really anymore, unfortunately. Maybe I can try again sometime. Anyway, so what I do here is I like to talk about my process and my writing, and a little bit sometimes my art, and this glare in my glasses lens is driving me crazy. I just spent like 5 minutes deciding if I wanted this light on or not. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, anyway, here we go. I don't really have a title. It's just kind of called the Tomli Story right now. Anyway, here we go. Sitting still under a bush at the base of a large tree, hidden by scrub and fern, Tomli crouched, defocusing her gaze, relaxing her breathing, reaching out her mind and consciousness to the small woodland creatures nearby. A toad a few feet away, hidden under some old leaves, a snake slowly moving toward it. Hold on a second. I know that I read all of this in a previous video, but I'm not sure if I'd made any changes of that, and I don't want to have you have to listen to all that again. And you can always go back and watch that video if you missed it. So, okay, I believe I'm going to start off again here. I think this is where I left off. I had editing to do at this point. So we're picking up from "It was a high honor to be a ranger." Daydreaming and not noticing a signal from the mind of a bird behind her, she was caught unaware as hands suddenly reached out and covered her mouth and nose. "So, you think to outsmart old Jerris, does you? Well, boy, and what do we haves here? Ah, it is my old knife you have, is it? Maybe I just cut out your eyes then." The foul old man chuckled grimly. Tomli began to struggle, fighting back tears, knowing how close freedom was, and shaking with fear of the beating she would get. Suddenly, a falcon came at them out of the sky, letting out a scream as it clawed Jerris' face as it went by. The brute let go of Tomli and clutched at his face. Looking up, the child saw the fierce bird coming back for another dive and leaped into some nearby bushes. The falcon made another loud screech before attacking again, flapping hard suddenly to just miss a swipe from Jerris' knife. Caught up in the scene, Tomli didn't notice the man until he was just behind Jerris, sword drawn. "Hold! You are at sword point!" Jarrus stood motionless, though still grasping his knife. Tomli watched from the bushes in fascination. This must be a ranger. She'd heard stories of how they sometimes had animal companions who fought beside them, though she'd also heard other fantastic stories of how some could actually change themselves into animals, though she didn't know whether she believed it or not. The man with the sword moved closer, so that the sharp point jabbed slightly into Jarrus' ribs. Now that we understand one another, let go the knife. Hesitation drew a small jab, and this time Jarrus complied, the knife falling to the ground with a soft thud. Tomli, seeing an opportunity, began to creep out, when she was surprised by a strong hand upon her shoulder, and she froze, tense. "Easy, you," a rough voice spoke behind her. Tomli trembled under the firm grip. "Come aside here, boy, and answer us." The man, with surprising gentleness, pulled Tomli out in front of Jarrus, who was rather disoriented by the falcon's attacks and looked rather shocked with his fat mouth gaping. He hadn't thought for a moment he'd be caught this way, not now that he had the boy as the perfect scout. Sweat appeared on his brow. The money he owed. But they hadn't accused him yet, though the man behind him, his voice was familiar. From that inn? "Look, boy, what do you know of this man?" This question came from the man who held her shoulders, still firm yet gentle. Tomli could easily have pulled away and run. She wondered why she didn't, but then it was her plan to lead them here. He was a rugged man who seemed used to living in the woods. The other, holding Jarrus at sword point, seemed more lordly, with a feeling of authority. Tomli thought for a moment. What were these people meaning to do? Timorously, she answered, looking down. Begging your pardon, sir. He's mean." When the men continued to watch her, she spoke again, looking at Jarrus' feet, turning away from the men's steady gaze, shielding her eyes with the wide brim of the hat. "He plays dice in different towns, sir." "Ah, and does he cheat at dice?" asked the lordly man. Now Jarrus spoke up, anxiously grasping at any last chance available. "My lord, you be playing dice too, trying to get by with your son if you had nothing. I'm not mean all the time as my boy says, I swear." At these words, Tomli, suddenly shaking with emotion and inner turmoil, struggling between maintaining the closeness she had been forming with Jarrus, who, in some ways, was better than her own father, but nonetheless, still would beat her as he would do. All this ran through her mind, but her goals came to the front. She must be away from the hurt. She must find rangers. She must find people she could trust. Jarrus whining to the men, speaking as a caring father, and the falseness of it was too much for Tomli, and she exploded with fury, pain, the tumult of sudden change of circumstances, and the uncertainty that came with it, the questions of why must things be so hard? "Liar, liar, he's lying!" Tomli screamed out, shaking, cutting him off. "You're not my father! I ran away from my father, and you are just as bad as him!" Tomli shook so hard the man let go and stepped back slightly, still ready to catch the boy, should he try to bolt, and quickly glanced over at the other, making eye contact, nodding, as if to confirm acknowledgement. With the outburst, all the woodland creatures scattered at once. "You are a cheating scoundrel, and even though I'm grateful for such kindness you did give, you still would hit me." Heaving and shuddering from such an extreme outburst, Tomli's small body collapsed to the ground, adrenaline still pumping hard. The slight youth was overtook by a flooding wash of tears from such a release. All the past harms finally, for the first time, declared. For the first time she really fought back, and it was terrifying. She wondered as she cried, would she have had that courage, were these men not here? Jarrus, seeing the men focused on Tomli, moved fast and grabbed his knife from where it had fallen, forgotten, taking off into the woods. He didn't get very far, however. The falcon, who had been circling out of view above the trees, returned like lightning and caught up with Jarrus. The men, and even Tomli, sniffling and wiping the snot and tears from her face on her grubby shirt, all began to laugh, for the oaf was running in circles, with the fierce bird above him, pecking his head, managing to deftly dodge and avoid the wild, unskilled bladed swipes, half blinded by blood, which bled freely from the bird's inflicted wounds. Jairus, in anger and frustration, finally threw the knife at the falcon, finally managing to clip it, but only on its leg. The falcon, having been hit, circled back ferociously for one last dive, crying out in defiance, clawing at Jairus' ear. "It would seem we have ourselves a bit of help," the lordly man said with a smile, indicating the bird, though he watched it thoughtfully. How unusual for such a bird to remain so focused, especially after sustaining a hit. Satisfied after that last attack, it ceased its battling and found a low branch on which to perch. It seemed to pay no notice of them now as it preened itself. Jairus panted and huffed, then passed out, falling heavily to the ground. Tomli came quickly forward, suddenly anxious about this man who had, at times, shown care for her, and hesitated. This man had done her quite a lot of ill, and yet she had also grown used to him. Indeed, she had thought that in some ways even he was better than her father. She had been able to gain more skills from him and see more people. Recently, she was even in a fight with a couple boys in town and actually was able to get back the pouch of coin they took from her, even though her secret was almost given away. Jairus actually rewarded her for that, letting her have some sweets after treating her to a stew at a tavern. She never would have had his life. She never would have had this life if she hadn't run away from her father, whose care was absent, and she was left alone often to tend the sheep, with the help and care of their faithful dog. She almost missed that simplicity. Even though her mother died when she was little, she remembered her father being different then. Leaving him had been so hard, but she could no longer trust him, whether he really loved her or not. He only paid attention to her mother and ignored her, only giving her attention when he seemed to want something or to hurt her feelings later. He even blamed her for her mother's death. She nearly burst into more tears, but sniffed them back, breathing deeply, and swallowed, daring a quick look at Jairus before casting her eyes quickly down again. "Is he dead?" the child asked. The lordly man came and stood next to her, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. He regarded the child for a moment. He seemed a boy of only about 10, a lanky, wispy thing, with chin-length brown hair and raggedy clothing, and a hat that seemed a little too big, yet well worn, made of sturdy sheep leather. He remembered Jairus had called the boy out as son, but had heard along with the other man Tomli's outburst, in which he declared he had run away from home and claimed no kinship with this scoundrel. Tomli tried not to make eye contact and shook, wanting to pull out of even his gentle grasp. The Lord felt the tension and calmly withdrew his hand. "Master Lim, would you see to our swindler?" And turning to Tomli, he said, "I doubt the falcon has finished him, but his wound may be severe. My huntsman will see to his care." Tomli nodded, relaxing a little. Seeing the boy so, he then sat down to address him and motioned the boy to sit as well, and Tomli complied. "Well, boy, we know your truth, and will now give you some of ours. I am Lord Rondal of this region, Rondas, and this," indicating the rugged man attending the fallen Jairus, "is my wonderful servant and huntsman, Master Limoran. Now, though we know your story, we know not your name." "I am Tom, my lord." She thought it best to still be a boy. She'd noticed these men treating her differently than was customary towards a girl. "Well, Tomli," continued Lord Rondal, "we had been enjoying a few days of patrolling the woods, and I had decided to stop at the little village back there along the coast, Calpurn it is, and I also wished to visit my Lord Mayor there, perhaps have a few friendly throws of dice. I confess I have not done in quite a while. Well, and that's when we met up with this chap. What's his name? Oh yes, Jairus." Did he cheat you?" Tomli interrupted, now feeling much more assertive, but catching herself quickly added, If you please, my lord." Lord Rondal raised his eyebrows, surprised at the boldness, but chuckled. "Yes, he did, or rather he cheated Master Limoran. Now, what kind of lord would I be if I let some petty criminal do ill to my servants, much less to my villagers and townsmen? Tomli felt very impressed by this man, who seemed more honorable and kind than any noble she had ever heard of. She was used to anyone wealthy or of great importance being generally rude and uncaring, even violent towards anyone of a lower class. She had lived all her short life in Arhanas, though, and it was what was familiar, so she felt a bit uncomfortable with his geniality, though was quickly warming up to him in spite of this. No adult, much less a lord, had been so kind. She still felt his gentle touch on her shoulder, almost wished it back, but being touched was still painful to her, after having received so much unkind touch, from hits to slaps, and some things in between. If you please, my lord, what will you do with him? Tomli asked, turning toward Jairus, who was still passed out, though now breathing normally, his head wrapped up by limerin, with a poultice of wild medicinal herbs to stop the bleeding. She wondered more about what would become of herself, though, and she was feeling disappointment that neither man said he was a ranger, remembering her strong interest and future plan. "Oh, well, when he is sufficiently revived, we shall take him back to court, and he shall be tried and most probably hung." Lord Rondal looked at Tomli for a moment, and something occurred to him. "Does this trouble you? He is apparently not your father. I suppose you also wonder what will happen to you now, don't you?" Tomli was about to say something, then paused, wondering how honest to be now. She decided to trust the lord of the land a little more, and said, "No, he is not my father, my lord. I ran away from home some time ago, for it was an evil place. Jairus found me and made me work for him. It wasn't all bad, but it wasn't better than home, and home was no good. Not even with the sheep and my dear Roy, our dog." Such a responsibility to leave the sheep. Not a very good shepherd, are you?" My father went into debt and had to sell the farm, my lord. Things got worse after that. I could no longer help him. I was starving, my lord." Lord Rondal regarded Tom, and Master Limerin came to sit nearby, having finished with Jairus. "You mentioned something about wanting to find rangers." Now the lord leaned over closer, so as to almost whisper, and Tomli lowered her head, casting her eyes downward, the wide brim of her roughly made leather hat hiding most of her face. She could now smell him like musk and leather, and some strange perfume. She had never been this close to a lord before, and she swallowed, beginning to sweat and almost tremble. "Let me tell you about rangers," he began in a more quiet, personal voice, glancing around as though someone might be listening. "Do not put your trust in them. They are very strange folk, akin to wizards. They know strange things and can do strange things. I am sure if you ask him, Master Limerin can tell you more." Then, rising, he added in a more normal tone of voice, eyeing Tomli, "We will remain here for a while as we wait for our criminal to recover enough to bring him to court." He looked down at Tomli, considering the slight, unkempt youth. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Tomli nodded sheepishly, and soon the four of them were crouched around a small fire, sharing some bread and cheese, as Jairus lay propped up against a stone, with a tremendous headache, half dozing. The men drank some wine from their skins, and suggested a few sips to Tomli, good to have after such frights, and gave her some water as well. Tomli accepted the wine after hungrily devouring all the bread and cheese she was given, and drank down so much water the men cautioned the child to slow down. I'll read this last little paragraph. Time had passed quietly as they ate, and the golden light of late afternoon streamed through the trees and foliage, bathing it in a calm radiance, and the two men stretched and relaxed. Jairus laid on his arm over a bit of soft moss, and soon snored. Tomli began to relax as well, stretched and watched the men sheepishly. She had many thoughts and questions racing through her head, but didn't know how to talk to them, afraid of giving too much of herself away, and lay there on the sun-warmed grass, next to the small fire, thinking about all that had happened, and soon sleep took her. That's all I'm going to read for now. I do have only like a little bit more written, so I'm going to do some more work on that. So That was quite a bit there. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm very interested in feedback. Yeah, I think that's good for now. Bye. Yeah, thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, Rainmaker's Story World Adventures. Please like, share, and subscribe.